All right, let's talk about something that affects every single one of us: water. It's the resource we all depend on, but it's also becoming alarmingly scarce. From a single farm all the way up to rivers that cross international borders, managing our water is a huge puzzle, and it's one that needs solutions at every single level. So let's dive in. And look, a picture like this from California's Folsom Lake, this isn't some far-off problem. It's a stark reality hitting home for a lot of people. When the water level drops this much, it really shows you just how vulnerable we are. Which brings us to the big question for today's explainer. In a world that's getting thirstier, how do we manage this precious, finite resource, both effectively and fairly? To get our heads around that, we're going to go on a scale-up journey. We'll start at the ground level, literally, with solutions right under our feet. Then we'll zoom out to see how whole communities plan for shortages. And finally, we'll go global to understand how nations negotiate water when it crosses borders. At the end, we'll tie it all together. Okay, first things first, let's establish the common ground here. The water crisis isn't an isolated event. It's a shared challenge, and it really does affect all of us, no matter where we happen to live. So that we're all on the same page, what exactly is a drought? It's not just a dry spell. It's way more complex. It's an imbalance where the water supply just can't keep up with demand. And this is often supercharged by rising temperatures and, well, our own consumption. Really, you can think of it as a massive supply and demand problem, but on a planetary scale. The scale of this can feel pretty overwhelming, right? When you're up against a global issue that's driven by huge climate patterns and population growth, it's so easy to feel kind of powerless. But the thing is, the solutions don't have to start at that global level. In fact, some of the most powerful strategies begin small, like really small. We're going to start with the very soil that's right under our feet. This is the very first step in our journey to find real, workable solutions. So let's zoom into that first scale and see how this all builds up. We're focusing on agriculture, and that's because it's one of the biggest water users on the entire planet. But, and this is the cool part, it's also a hotbed of incredible innovation for conservation. For a very long time, traditional farming has been a thirsty business. But hey, necessity is the mother of invention, and farmers all over the world are now pioneering new methods to grow more food with less water. They're totally changing their relationship with it. Okay, so check this out. It's a fundamental shift in thinking. Conventional farming often involves churning up the soil, which exposes it to the sun and wind, and that means a ton of moisture gets lost. The alternative, conservation tillage, is brilliantly simple. By just leaving the leftover bits of the crop on the surface, farmers create this natural shield that holds moisture in and stops erosion. It's such a simple idea, but it has a massive impact. And that's just the beginning. It's like a whole toolbox of smart techniques is opening up. You've got super precise methods like drip irrigation that puts water right where it needs to be, at the roots. You've got farmers choosing crops that are naturally a better fit for a drier climate. The common thread in all of this is working with nature, not fighting against it, to basically turn the soil into a giant sponge. Now, these micro solutions are absolutely crucial. They can make one farm totally resilient and sustainable. But what happens when the problem is bigger than one farm? What do you do when an entire town's wells are at risk of running dry? Well, that means we have to scale up our thinking. And that brings us to our next level, the mesoscale. This is the world of towns, counties, and regions. And here, the challenge isn't just about individual action anymore. It's about coordinated, community-wide planning to make sure nobody gets left behind. This picture of a California reservoir really tells the story, doesn't it? This isn't one person's water source. It's a shared lifeline for thousands of people. So when it gets this low, it becomes a collective problem, and that demands a collective solution. One person saving water is great, but it can't refill a reservoir on its own. So how do communities get organized? Well, in places like California, which has been hit hard by severe droughts, the government has stepped in. There's now legislation that requires counties to create a formal county drought resilience plan. And this isn't just a friendly suggestion, it's a mandate. They have to proactively get ready for the worst. But where do you even begin with a plan like that? Well, any good plan has to start by figuring out who is most at risk. Before you can even think about solutions, you have to diagnose the problem, and that means doing a deep, data-driven assessment. And this is what that process actually looks like. It's super systematic. First, you analyze the hazard itself. You look at historical data for rainfall, groundwater levels. Then you map your assets. Where are all the small water systems and private wells located? Step 3 is critical. You look at vulnerability. And that's not just physical risks, like a well that's too shallow, but also social risks, like low-income families who can't afford to drill a new well. Finally, you pull all that data together to get a really clear picture of your community's biggest drought risks. Once you know the risks, the plan really splits into two parts. First, you have your short-term response. This is your emergency playbook. And it can be as direct as trucking in water to communities whose wells have literally run dry. It's a lifeline, a critical step to deal with an immediate crisis. But, trucking in water is just a Band-Aid. The real goal is long-term solutions. These are the proactive investments that mean you won't need as many emergency responses down the road. We're talking about things like connecting vulnerable homes to more stable water systems, investing in bigger regional infrastructure, and, this is a big one, updating policies like well permits to make sure any new construction is built to handle future droughts. Okay, so we've gone from the farm to the county. We've seen how local planning can build some serious resilience. But there's one more level to climb. What happens when a river doesn't care about a county line, or even a national border? What happens when your water source is shared with another country? And that takes us to the macro scale, the complex, high-stakes world of international relations, where managing water becomes all about diplomacy, international law, and negotiation. Disputes over shared rivers are incredibly complex. They can flare up over quantity. Say one country builds a dam upstream, and that reduces the flow for its neighbor. They can be about quality. Maybe pollution from one country contaminates the water for another, and sometimes the fight is even about where the border along the river actually is. So how do you solve these without it blowing up into a major conflict? Well, international law actually provides a kind of ladder of escalation. It almost always starts with direct talks. If that doesn't work, you might bring in a neutral third party to mediate. The next step could be formal fact-finding, just to agree on the basic science. And if all else fails, the final step is adjudication, taking the case to an international court for a decision that's binding. And this whole system is built on one core idea, which was laid out way back in 1972. It basically says that a country's control over its own resources isn't absolute. It comes with a responsibility not to harm your neighbors. This single principle is the bedrock of pretty much all transboundary environmental cooperation. And this isn't just stuff in textbooks. It happens for real. The International Court of Justice has weighed in on major water disputes, like the one between Chile and Bolivia over the Salala River, and another one between Costa Rica and Nicaragua over the San Juan River. These cases are what help clarify the rules for how we all share our planet's water. All right, we've gone from the micro to the meso, all the way up to the macro. We've looked at solutions in the soil, plants for our communities, and laws for our nations. So now let's connect all the drops and see what this unified approach really looks like. So, what have we learned? At the smallest scale, it's all about efficiency. Smart farming is a foundational piece of this puzzle. It helps reduce demand where it's often the highest. At the community scale, the key is foresight. Proactive, data-driven planning is really the only way to figure out who's most at risk and build systems that protect everybody. And finally, at the global scale, it's all about cooperation. Water can absolutely be a source of conflict, but these established legal frameworks give us a clear path for nations to manage shared resources peacefully. You see how it all links together? From a single drop of water saved on a farm to a treaty signed between two nations, every single action is connected. The micro, meso, and macro scales aren't separate things. They're intertwined parts of one big system. The water itself connects us all. This seedling, pushing up through that cracked, dry earth, I think that's a perfect symbol of resilience. The challenges we face are immense, for sure, but so is our potential for innovative and cooperative solutions. The real question isn't if we can solve this, but how we will choose to manage this shared resource together. And that choice will define the future of our thirsty world. Thanks for tuning in.